At 2:47 a.m. on September 3, 1939, Type VIIB U-boat patrol vessel U-30 occupied attack position 250 nautical miles northwest of Ireland, submerged at periscope depth in Atlantic waters measuring 14 degrees Celsius, tracking the silhouette of passenger liner SS Athenia through crosshairs, as the vessel maintained 15 knots toward Canada with 1,103 civilians aboard. While two British destroyers patrolled the convoy lanes 40 miles east, the submarine's commander prepared to execute doctrine that Admiralty strategists in London and Washington had publicly dismissed for 2 decades: the sustained interdiction of Atlantic merchant traffic through coordinated submersible warfare. British naval intelligence projections, distributed to cabinet ministers just 8 months earlier, estimated that German submarine forces would sink fewer than 150,000 tons of Allied shipping monthly, and could be contained through established convoy procedures and surface destroyer patrols within the first 6 months of any European conflict. German Naval High Command possessed 57 operational submarines on the day Britain declared war, fewer than one-third the number required under Kriegsmarine planning documents to effectively blockade British ports. The opening salvo of what would become the longest continuous military campaign of the Second World War had begun, and institutional certainty on both sides would dissolve in the cold mathematics of tonnage sunk versus tonnage, replaced across 2,075 days of Atlantic combat. The Treaty of Versailles, signed June 28, 1919, explicitly prohibited Germany from possessing or constructing submarines. Article 181 stated without ambiguity that no submarine vessels of any classification would be included in German naval reconstruction. Allied naval staffs, particularly Britain's Admiralty, viewed this prohibition as permanently removing the submarine threat that had sunk 11.9 million tons of Allied and neutral shipping between 1914 and 1918. The assumption held by senior British naval officers was that technological and tactical countermeasures, specifically ASDIC sonar systems and disciplined convoy procedures, had rendered submarine warfare obsolete by 1918. This belief was codified in British naval doctrine publications issued throughout the 1920s and 1930s. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 and subsequent London Naval Treaties of 1930 and 1936 further reinforced institutional dismissal of submarine warfare as a strategic tool. Article 22 of the 1930 London Naval Treaty prohibited submarines from attacking merchant vessels without first placing passengers and crew in safety, effectively limiting submarines to surface warfare, where destroyer escorts held overwhelming advantage. Royal Navy tactical publications from 1935 calculated that convoy systems, when properly implemented with destroyer screens, reduced submarine effectiveness by 94% compared to independent routing of merchant vessels. When Adolf Hitler publicly announced the existence of the Kriegsmarine submarine arm on June 18, 1935, British naval intelligence assessed the threat as manageable. Intelligence estimates noted Germany's submarine construction capacity could not exceed 12 vessels annually without diverting resources from surface fleet expansion. The Anglo-German Naval Agreement, signed exactly 1 week after the submarine announcement, permitted Germany to construct submarine tonnage up to 45% of British Commonwealth submarine strength, approximately 24,000 tons total displacement. British planners calculated this would translate to approximately 65 submarines maximum, of which no more than 20 could maintain operational patrol at any given time due to maintenance cycles and training requirements. Admiral Sir Ernest Chatfield, First Sea Lord from 1933 to 1938, testified before Parliament in March 1936 that German submarine construction posed negligible strategic threat to British maritime commerce, given current technological and tactical countermeasures available to His Majesty's naval forces. This assessment was distributed throughout Admiralty offices and formed the foundation of British anti-submarine warfare planning through 1939. The fundamental assumption was that lessons learned from 1914 and 1918, particularly the effectiveness of convoy systems implemented in May 1917, had permanently solved the submarine problem. German naval theorists, meanwhile, confronted their own institutional skepticism. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine from 1928 to 1943, advocated for surface fleet expansion centered on battleships and heavy cruisers. Raeder's strategic vision, outlined in the Z Plan approved by Hitler in January 1939, allocated 65% of naval construction resources to surface combatants. The Z Plan projected a balanced fleet of 10 battleships, 15 pocket battleships, 5 heavy cruisers and 44 light cruisers would be operational by 1948. Submarines occupied a secondary role, classified as coastal defense vessels and commerce raiders for use against independent merchants in distant waters where convoy protection would be weak. Captain Karl Dönitz, appointed commander of submarines in September 1935, submitted operational assessments to Naval High Command arguing that 300 Type VII U-boats, operating in coordinated patrol lines, could sever Britain's Atlantic supply routes within 6 months of war declaration. Dönitz's calculations, based on meticulous study of First World War records, determined that sinking 750,000 tons of merchant shipping monthly would exceed Britain's ship construction capacity and force capitulation within 12 to 18 months. His proposals were repeatedly rejected. Naval High Command staff studies concluded that coordinated submarine operations were tactically impossible given limitations in radio communication, navigation accuracy, and mechanical reliability of submarine vessels. The strategic dismissal extended beyond Germany and Britain. United States Navy war plans from 1938, designated Rainbow 4 and Rainbow 5, allocated minimal resources to anti-submarine warfare. American naval doctrine, influenced heavily by Alfred Thayer Mahan's emphasis on decisive surface fleet engagement, considered submarines auxiliary vessels useful primarily for reconnaissance and mine-laying. The U.S. Navy possessed 99 submarines in 1939, but maintained only 12 destroyer escorts equipped with functional depth charge racks and sonar apparatus suitable for anti-submarine operations. American merchant marine officers received no formal training in convoy procedures or submarine evasion tactics. French naval doctrine mirrored British assumptions. The Marine Nationale operated 77 submarines in September 1939, the world's second-largest submarine fleet, but employed them exclusively for Mediterranean patrol and colonial defense. French tactical manuals from 1937 classified submarines as defensive weapons of limited offensive capability against protected shipping. This widespread institutional certainty, shared by British, American, French, and even German naval establishment, rested on several technical assumptions. First, ASDIC sonar systems, when properly operated, could detect submerged submarines at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards, providing adequate time for destroyer escorts to maneuver for depth charge attack. Second, convoy procedures force submarines to attack from predictable angles, exposing them to escort counterattack. Third, submarine communication limitations prevented coordination between multiple vessels, limiting each boat to independent operations where probability of successful merchant interception remained below 8% according to British operational research calculations. Fourth, submarine mechanical reliability issues, particularly diesel engine failures and battery endurance limitations, would force boats to surface frequently, exposing them to air patrol detection. Each of these assumptions would prove catastrophically flawed when tested against operational reality in the North Atlantic, between September 1939 and May 1943. Germany declared unrestricted submarine warfare in the Atlantic at 9:00 p.m. on September 3, 1939, 9 hours after Britain's declaration of war. Prize regulations, the international law requiring submarines to surface and permit merchant crews to abandon ship before sinking, were suspended for vessels in designated combat zones around the British Isles. Kriegsmarine submarines operated under written orders designated Operational Order for the Submarine Force in the event of war with Britain, prepared in August 1939 and distributed to all U-boat commanders on August 31. 27 submarines departed German bases between August 19 and September 4, 1939. 18 boats deployed to patrol sectors in the western approaches, the strategic shipping convergence zone southwest of Ireland, where Atlantic convoys approached British ports. 9 boats patrolled North Sea approaches and the Bay of Biscay. This represented nearly half of Germany's operational submarine strength, 57 commissioned boats total, of which 46 were considered combat-ready. The remainder were training vessels or undergoing maintenance. The sinking of SS Athenia by U-30 on the war's first day created immediate strategic complications. The vessel, a 13,500-ton passenger liner operated by Donaldson Atlantic Line, sank in 3 hours with loss of 117 civilians including 28 Americans. German Naval High Command immediately denied involvement, fearing the incident would provoke United States entry into the war. U-30's commander, operating under recently issued combat orders, had mistaken Athenia for an armed merchant cruiser. The sinking violated prize regulations and mirrored the 1915 Lusitania incident that had influenced American entry into the First World War. Admiral Reeder issued updated combat orders on September 4 prohibiting attacks on passenger vessels under any circumstances. This restriction limited submarine targeting to cargo vessels, tankers, and confirmed military transports. British Admiralty immediately reinstated convoy procedures dormant since 1918. The first convoy, designated HX-1, Halifax to Britain, Convoy Series 1, departed Halifax, Nova Scotia on September 16, 1939 with 18 merchant vessels escorted by 2 destroyers. Convoy SC-1, Sydney, Cape Breton to Britain followed on September 22. The convoy system, dismissed by some merchant marine associations as unnecessarily cautious, became mandatory for all vessels above 13 knots on September 26. German submarines sank 41 Allied merchant vessels totaling 153,879 tons in September 1939, exactly matching British intelligence predictions of sustainable monthly losses. 2 U-boats were destroyed, U-39 by destroyer HMS Faulkner on September 14 and U-27 by destroyer HMS Fortune on September 20. Both submarines had surfaced to engage merchant targets and were caught by escort vessels. The loss rate 7.4% of deployed submarines suggested British anti-submarine tactics were performing as designed. Admiralty operational summaries from October 1939 concluded, current merchant losses remain within acceptable parameters and confirm pre-war assessments regarding submarine warfare limitations in the convoy era. October and November 1939 produced similar results. Submarines sank 134,807 tons in October and 51,589 tons in November. 4 additional submarines were destroyed by destroyer escorts or air patrol. The declining monthly totals reinforced British confidence in convoy procedures. What Admiralty analysts failed to recognize was that German submarines were operating under severe tactical restrictions that bore little resemblance to Dönnitz's proposed operational doctrine. Submarines in this period operated independently, patrolling assigned sectors 200 to 400 miles apart. When a commander sighted a convoy, he was required to shadow it, report position and course to Naval High Command via radio, then attack independently. No mechanism existed for coordinating multiple submarines against a single convoy. Radio communication required surfacing, exposing the boat to air patrol. Navigation accuracy, dependent on celestial observation or dead reckoning, varied by 10 to 20 nautical miles daily, making precise rendezvous between boats impossible. U-boat crews faced mechanical reliability issues that validated pre-war skepticism. Type WWII submarines, the primary operational variant, could sustain submerged operations for 90 minutes at maximum speed before battery depletion forced surfacing. Diesel engines failed frequently. Maintenance logs from boats returning to base in late 1939 documented engine failure rates of 34% per patrol. Torpedo reliability remained problematic. Magnetic detonators, designed to explode beneath ship hulls where structural damage would be maximum, malfunctioned in 60% of documented attacks. Torpedoes frequently ran too deep, passing beneath targets without detonation. By December 1939, German Naval High Command questioned whether submarine warfare could achieve strategic effect. Monthly sinking tonnage had dropped to 78,000 tons, half the rate required under Dönnitz's calculations to exceed British ship construction capacity. The Z-Plan received renewed emphasis, with resources diverted from submarine production to accelerate battleship construction. Hitler's directive of December 15, 1939, explicitly stated that surface fleet expansion would receive priority over submarine construction, until such time as submarine warfare demonstrates measurable strategic impact. The battle for Atlantic supply routes centered on mathematical reality. Britain imported 68 million tons of material annually in 1939, including 20 million tons of food, 11 million tons of petroleum products, and 15 million tons of raw materials for industrial production. British agriculture produced 30% of domestic food requirements. The remainder arrived by ship, primarily from North America, but also from South America, Africa, and Asia via Gibraltar. All Atlantic shipping converged on the western approaches, a 400-mile wide zone bounded by Ireland to the east, the 20th meridian west to the west, the 50th parallel north to the south, and the 60th parallel north to the north. This geographic funnel created a target-rich environment where submarines could patrol predictable convoy routes. From German bases at Wilhelmshaven, Kiel, and later Lorient and Brest on the French Atlantic coast, Submarines required 5 to 7 days transit to reach Western Approach's patrol zones. Type VII submarines carried fuel for 28 days continuous patrol, allowing 14 to 16 days on station before return transit. British Operational Research Section calculated in early 1940 that maintaining continuous patrol coverage of the Western Approaches required 24 to 30 submarines on station simultaneously. Germany possessed sufficient boats to achieve this, but not sufficient boats to maintain replacement cycles, training requirements, and mechanical maintenance schedules. The operational mathematics revealed a critical limitation. Of 57 submarines on September 1, 1939, only 9 to 11 could maintain active patrol at any time. The rest were in transit, undergoing maintenance, or conducting training. Convoy routing attempted to exploit this limitation. The Admiralty Submarine Tracking Room, established in January 1940 at the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center, plotted U-boat positions based on radio direction finding, agent reports, and aerial reconnaissance. Commander Roger Wynne, the civilian barrister appointed to direct the tracking room, developed routing procedures that diverted convoys around known submarine concentrations. This tactical adjustment forced submarines to patrol larger areas, further diluting already thin coverage. The geographic advantage shifted dramatically in June 1940 when German forces occupied France. The ports of Brest, Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, La Pallice, and Bordeaux provided Atlantic-facing bases that reduced transit time to Western Approaches by 4 to 5 days. A submarine based at Lorient could reach operational zones in 450 miles versus 1,100 miles from Wilhelmshaven. This translated to 8 additional days on station per patrol, nearly doubling effective patrol endurance. By July 1940, Germany could maintain 20 to 24 submarines on continuous Atlantic patrol versus 9 to 11 from German bases. British destroyer escort availability simultaneously collapsed. The Royal Navy possessed 113 destroyers and 187 smaller escort vessels in September 1939. The Norway Campaign, April-June 1940, and Dunkirk evacuation, May-June 1940, resulted in 13 destroyer losses and severe damage to 31 additional vessels. The fall of France eliminated French naval cooperation, 77 French submarines and 45 destroyers that had been allocated to Atlantic convoy protection. Italian entry into the war in June 1940 forced British withdrawal of 30 destroyers to Mediterranean patrol. By August 1940, the Royal Navy could provide only 68 destroyers for Atlantic convoy protection, insufficient to escort the 40 to 50 convoys operating simultaneously. The strategic mathematics shifted decisively against Britain. Submarine patrol density increased while escort availability decreased. Monthly sinking tonnage began rising. 288,461 tons in June 1940, 352,407 tons in July, 267,618 tons in August. Germany commissioned new submarines at 8 to 10 boats monthly, faster than British forces could destroy them. The replacement rate dropped to 4 submarines destroyed per month in summer 1940 versus 7 destroyed monthly in late 1939. Dönitz received authorization in August 1940 to implement coordinated patrol tactics he had advocated since 1935. The tactical system, designated Rudeltaktik, pack tactics in operational orders, organized submarines into patrol lines across predicted convoy routes. When one boat sighted a convoy, it would maintain shadow contact while transmitting position reports to headquarters. Additional submarines would home on radio transmissions and converge on the convoy's position, executing simultaneous nighttime surface attacks from multiple directions. The tactical innovation exploited several British defensive weaknesses. First, ASDIC sonar could only detect submerged submarines. Surface submarines remained invisible to sonar, appearing on radar as small surface contacts indistinguishable from fishing vessels or debris. Second, convoy escorts positioned themselves in circular screen around merchant vessels, optimized for submerged submarine attacks from predictable angles. Simultaneous surface attacks from multiple bearings overwhelmed escort response capacity. Third, submarines possessed higher surface speed than most merchant vessels, 17 knots versus 8 to 11 knots for typical cargo ships. Submarines could maneuver around convoy perimeter, selecting optimal attack angles. The first coordinated patrol operation occurred October 16, 1940, against convoys SC-7 and HX-79. SC-7 departed Sydney, Cape Breton on October 5 with 35 merchant vessels escorted by sloop HMS Scarborough and corvette HMS Bluebell, 2 escorts for 35 ships spread across 20 square miles of ocean. The convoy maintained 7 knots, the speed of its slowest vessel. U-boat patrol line, designated Grup 1, positioned 6 submarines across a 150-mile front southwest of Rockall Bank at the 15th meridian west. U-48 made first contact at 4:20 p.m. on October 16, sighting SC-7's lead vessels at 15 miles range. The boat transmitted contact report and position, then submerged to avoid air patrol. 5 additional submarines received the transmission at staggered intervals. U-46 at 4:55 p.m., U-99 at 6:10 p.m., U-101 at 7:30 p.m., U-123 at 9:45 p.m., and U-38 not until 11:20 p.m. due to radio receiver malfunction. All boats proceeded toward transmitted position at maximum surface speed. Coordinated attack commenced 11:47 p.m. October 17. Submarine commanders had agreed via radio to attack simultaneously from different compass bearings, preventing escort concentration. U-48 approached from northwest, U-99 from northeast, U-101 from southeast, U-46 from southwest. Moon phase was new moon, 0 lunar illumination. Cloud cover eliminated starlight. Visibility measured less than 800 yards. Merchant vessels maintained navigation lights per convoy procedure, making them visible at 3 miles, while submarines running on electric motors remained undetected. U-48 fired 4 bow torpedoes at 11:47 p.m. from 700 yards range. 3 struck SS Sedgepool, SS Carsbrook, and SS Fiscus within 20 seconds. U-99 fired 2 torpedoes at 11:51 p.m., sinking SS Beatus and SS Sinfield. U-101 fired 3 torpedoes at 11:54 p.m., sinking SS Blair Angus, SS Eaglescliff Hall, and SS Thalia. Convoy escorts fired illumination shells, revealing chaos of burning merchant vessels, lifeboats, and oil slicks, but no submarine silhouettes. The boats had submerged immediately after firing and withdrawn at depth. 20 minutes of coordinated attacks sank 8 vessels totaling 42,000 tons. Escorts dropped 31 depth charges blindly into probable submarine locations. No submarines were damaged. At 1:15 a.m., escorts ordered convoy to execute emergency turn, changing course 90 degrees to northwest. The maneuver created temporary separation from submarines, requiring the boats to relocate the convoy. U-99 regained contact at 3:40 a.m. October 18, tracking convoy's altered course. The submarine surfaced, transmitted updated position, and 3 boats converged for second coordinated attack beginning 10:15 p.m. October 18. U-99 fired 5 torpedoes from starboard side of convoy, sinking SS Scoresby, SS Shekatika, and tanker SS Languedoc. U-123 attacked from port side, sinking SS Clintonia and SS Creekirk. U-38 penetrated convoy formation from astern, firing at SS Cerritos at 400 yards range. The torpedo struck forward hold, detonating aviation fuel cargo. The vessel exploded, illuminating ocean for 2 miles radius. 8 additional submarines, alerted by radio transmissions and converging on SC position, observed the explosion from 20 to 40 miles distance. SC-7 lost 20 of 35 merchant vessels between October 16-19, totaling 79,592 tons. Convoy HX-79, following 100 miles behind SC-7 on parallel course, encountered same submarine patrol line October 1920. 12 of 49 merchant vessels were sunk, 75,069 tons lost. Combined operations sank 32 ships totaling 154,661 tons in 4 nights. 2 submarines suffered damage from depth charge attacks, neither severe enough to abort patrol. No submarines were destroyed. The Admiralty received preliminary casualty reports October 20. Operational summaries noted unprecedented coordination in enemy submarine operations, and escort procedures ineffective against multidirectional surface attacks. Commander Wynn's submarine tracking room had identified the concentration of submarines via radio direction finding, but convoy routing could not avoid entire 150-mile patrol line. Additional escorts were unavailable. Every destroyer and corvette capable of Atlantic duty was already assigned. Monthly sinking tonnage for October 1940 reached 352,407 tons, exceeding British merchant ship construction capacity by 180,000 tons. For the first time, losses outpaced replacement. The strategic balance Admiralty planners had dismissed as impossible, submarines severing Atlantic supply routes, was materializing in operational reality. German submarine crews designated the period from June 1940 to March 1941 as Die Glückliche Zeit, the happy time. Monthly sinking tonnage averaged 282,000 tons across these 10 months. British merchant ship construction produced 98,000 tons monthly. The gap 184,000 tons lost per month beyond replacement capacity represented strategic catastrophe approaching geometric progression. British import capacity collapsed from 68 million tons annually to projected 47 million tons by mid-1941 if sinking rates continued. Ministry of Food Emergency Planning documents from November 1940 calculated that food imports dropping below 15 million tons annually would force rationing reductions threatening civil stability. Petroleum imports declined from 11 million tons in 1939 to projected 7.8 million tons for 1941, forcing severe restrictions on civilian transportation and threatening aviation fuel availability. The tactical problem facing convoy escorts was fundamentally unsolvable with available resources. A typical Atlantic convoy in late 1940 consisted of 40 to 50 merchant vessels organized in columns 1,000 yards apart, creating a rectangular formation approximately 6 miles wide and 3 miles deep. Escort groups consisted of 1 destroyer and 3 corvettes for convoys below 30 ships, 2 destroyers and 4 corvettes for larger convoys. 4 escort vessels could not establish effective perimeter defense around formations covering 18 square miles. Naval doctrine-specified escorts should maintain positions 2,000 yards from convoy perimeter, effective ASDIC detection range. This created a defensive perimeter 10 miles wide and 7 miles deep requiring continuous patrol by escorts moving at 15 knots. 4 vessels patrolling this perimeter created 2.5-mile gaps between each vessel. Gap submarines could transit surfaced without detection. Radar, still in experimental development, could not reliably detect submarine conning towers below 2,000 yards range. Visual lookouts proved ineffective in darkness, fog, or rough seas. Submarines exploited these conditions systematically. Whether reports from October 1940 documented attacks occurring during conditions of 610 or greater cloud cover in 83% of engagements, conditions providing minimal moonlight or starlight. British countermeasures remained limited to evasive routing. The submarine tracking room successfully plotted patrol line positions based on radio direction finding, but convoy routes could not avoid all concentration zones without adding significant transit time. Some convoys were delayed 3 to 5 days routing around known submarine positions, creating port congestion and reducing overall import capacity. Air Patrol provided marginal deterrence. Royal Air Force Coastal Command operated 298 aircraft suitable for maritime patrol in late 1940, primarily Lockheed Hudson and Avro Anson twin-engine bombers with combat radius of 400 miles. This provided coverage over western approaches close to British coast, but submarines operated 600 to 1,000 miles from land where air patrol could not reach. The Atlantic Gap, ocean area beyond air coverage, extended from 20 degrees west longitude to 40 degrees west, approximately 1,200 miles across. Submarines concentrated attacks in this zone where air threat was zero. Technical problems plagued British depth charges. The standard Mark VII depth charge contained 300 pounds of TNT set to detonate at 50, 100, 150, or 300 feet depth. Submarines typically dove to 400 feet when under attack below maximum depth charge setting. Delayed fuse depth charges set to sink to 400 feet before detonation were introduced in November 1940, but production could not meet demand. Most escorts operated with standard charges, incapable of reaching U-boat diving depth. Torpedo countermeasures proved equally inadequate. Acoustic torpedo decoy systems designed to lure torpedoes away from merchant vessels were tested in December 1940 but showed 12% effectiveness in trials. Torpedo nets, heavy steel mesh deployed from ship sides to physically block torpedoes, reduced ship speed by 3 knots and were removed from most vessels by January 1941. Zigzag patterns, random course changes designed to complicate torpedo targeting, were employed but reduced convoy speed by 2 knots, extending transit time and increasing exposure period to submarine attack. Germany commissioned 56 new submarines between June 1940 and March 1941. Britain destroyed 21 U-boats in the same period, a kill ratio of 2.6 submarines commissioned for every submarine destroyed. Operational submarine strength increased from 57 boats in June 1940 to 92 boats in March 1941. Patrol density in the Atlantic doubled, further overwhelming escort capacity. The strategic situation deteriorated beyond merchant losses. Escort vessel attrition reached crisis levels. Between September 1939 and March 1941, Britain lost 27 destroyers and 19 corvettes to submarine, air, and mine attacks in Atlantic operations. Replacement construction produced 15 destroyers and 42 corvettes, barely offsetting losses. Escort quality declined as veteran crews were distributed among new vessels, diluting experience levels. American assistance remained minimal despite growing alarm in Washington. The United States maintained official neutrality until December 1941. Limited material aid arrived via Lend-Lease legislation passed March 1941, including 50 obsolete First World War destroyers transferred to British service. These vessels, built in 1918-1919, lacked modern radar, sonar, or anti-submarine weapons. Most required extensive refitting before operational deployment. Winston Churchill, in a directive dated March 6, 1941, designated the Atlantic Campaign the dominating factor all through the war. Never for one moment could we forget that everything happening elsewhere on land, at sea, or in the air depended ultimately on its outcome. The directive established the Battle of the Atlantic Committee under Churchill's direct chairmanship, coordinating Admiralty, Air Ministry, and Ministry of War transport responses. Resources previously allocated to Mediterranean operations and home defense were redirected to Atlantic convoy protection. March 1941 marked statistical peak of submarine effectiveness. U-boats sank 243,020 tons that month, losses requiring replacement of 5.2 million tons annually at equivalent rate. British shipyard capacity stood at 1.2 million tons annually, with American assistance potentially adding 2 million tons. The gap, 2 million tons annually, could not be closed through construction alone. Technological countermeasures began deployment. Type 271 centimetric radar, operational from February 1941, detected submarine conning towers at 2,500 to 3,000 yards in darkness or fog. Initial production equipped 10 escort vessels monthly. HFDF, high-frequency direction finding, pronounced HFDF, passive radio receivers, capable of detecting and triangulating submarine radio transmissions without alerting the submarine, were installed on convoy escorts beginning March 1941. These systems allowed escorts to locate submarines conducting radio communication during patrol coordination. The systems demonstrated immediate tactical impact, but required months to equip adequate numbers of escorts. A March 16, 1941 engagement illustrated both potential and limitations. Convoy HX-112, escorted by 5 destroyers equipped with Type 271 radar and HFDF, detected submarine radio transmissions at 22:15 hours March 16. Radar located U-110 at 2,900 yards while surfaced. Destroyer HMS Vanoc closed at 28 knots, forcing U-110 to crash dive. Depth charge attack damaged the boat's pressure hull, forcing it to surface. The submarine was captured intact, the first submarine capture with functioning Enigma cipher machine and current codebooks. The intelligence windfall allowed British cryptographers to read German naval communications for the next 4 months. Similar engagements remained rare. By April 1941, only 34 escort vessels possessed Type 271 radar and 18 possessed HFDF equipment. Germany operated 92 submarines with 30 to 35 maintaining continuous Atlantic patrol. The technological advantage remained insufficient to reverse strategic balance. Escort tactics evolved in response to coordinated patrol operations. Captain Frederick Walker, commanding 36th Escort Group, developed creeping attack procedures where one escort maintained sonar contact while a second escort approached slowly at 5 knots, minimizing propeller noise that alerted submarines to attack approach. The attacking escort released depth charges at point-blank range 200 yards or less, increasing probability of catastrophic damage. Walker's group destroyed 5 submarines between March and May 1941 using these tactics. The procedures required extensive training and precise coordination between multiple escorts, resources unavailable to most convoy groups. Escort Command established Western Approach's tactical unit at Liverpool in February 1941, training escort crews in anti-submarine warfare using systematic simulations and captured submarine examination. Training throughput remained limited to 120 officers and 600 crew monthly, insufficient to train escorts for 40 concurrent convoys. United States entry into the war, December 11, 1941, paradoxically worsened Atlantic convoy losses. German submarines redeployed to American coastal waters where merchant vessels operated independently without convoy protection or escort. Operation Paukenschlag Drumbeat, commencing January 13, 1942, positioned 12 submarines along American east coast from New York to Cape Hatteras. American coastal defense proved catastrophically unprepared. The U.S. Navy possessed 173 vessels suitable for anti-submarine escort duty in December 1941. Atlantic Fleet retained 55 destroyers for convoy escort, Remaining vessels, primarily Coast Guard cutters and converted yachts, lacked sonar, depth charges, or trained crews. American coastal cities maintained full illumination despite submarine threat, silhouetting merchant vessels against lighted horizons for submarine observation. Submarines sank 397 ships totaling 2 million tons in American waters between January and August 1942, monthly average exceeding 250,000 tons. The operational environment mirrored the happy time period. Submarines operated surfaced, attacked merchant vessels at leisure, and faced minimal counterattack. U-123 sank 25 vessels, totaling 140,000 tons, in 2 patrols off New Jersey in January-February 1942, without sustaining damage. American implementation of convoy procedures proceeded slowly. The U.S. Navy resisted convoy adoption, arguing that independent sailing with evasive routing provided superior protection, the same argument British Admiralty had abandoned in September 1939. Coastal convoys commenced May 1942, initially covering routes from Norfolk to Key West. Extension to Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico routes followed in July and August 1942. Sinking tonnage in American waters dropped to 56,000 tons in September 1942 as convoy coverage expanded. The strategic calculation shifted decisively in combined British-American operations. Anglo-American convoy conferences in Washington, March 1942, established Integrated Escort Command. British escort groups began operating from American ports, American escorts from British ports. Standardized escort tactics and communication procedures reduced coordination delays. Combined merchant marine pools allowed optimal cargo routing regardless of vessel nationality. The strategic climax occurred March 1943. Germany operated 212 operational submarines with 116 maintaining continuous Atlantic patrol, quadruple the patrol density of late 1940. Monthly sinking tonnage exceeded 500,000 tons in November 1942 and again in March 1943. Allied shipping losses for 1942 totaled 7.8 million tons, vessels destroyed. Replacement construction produced 7.1 million tons, a deficit of 700,000 tons despite maximum American shipyard output. March 1943, convoy battles demonstrated both maximum submarine effectiveness and approaching operational limits. Convoys as C-122 and HX-229, sailing parallel routes 90 miles apart, encountered coordinated patrol operation involving 38 submarines between March 1620. The submarines sank 21 of 90 merchant vessels, totaling 146,596 tons. Escort groups destroyed 1 submarine. The exchange rate, 21 merchants lost per submarine destroyed, represented unsustainable Allied losses. Technological and tactical countermeasures reached critical mass in spring 1943. Very long-range VLR maritime patrol aircraft, consolidated B-24 Liberators with 2,400-mile combat radius, closed the Atlantic Gap. The 1st VLR Squadron, RAF 120 Squadron, began Atlantic operations from Iceland in April 1943. VLR coverage forced submarines to remain submerged during daylight, reducing patrol effectiveness by 60%. Submarines could no longer transit surfaced at 17 knots, but instead crept at 4 knots submerged, requiring 3 times longer to reach patrol stations or intercept convoys. Escort carrier groups, small aircraft carriers converted from merchant hulls and escorting convoys directly, entered service March 1943. HMS Biter, first British escort carrier in Atlantic service, provided air coverage within convoy defensive perimeter. Aircraft from escort carriers sank or damaged submarines attempting approach runs, preventing them from establishing attack positions. By June 1943, 12 escort carriers operated in Atlantic, providing air coverage for 30% of convoys. Centimetric radar equipped 90% of escort vessels by May 1943, allowing detection of surface submarines in any weather at ranges exceeding 3,000 yards. HFDF equipment, installed on 65% of escorts, pinpointed submarine radio transmissions. Improved depth charges, Mark X pattern with 600 pounds explosive, could detonate at 700 feet below maximum submarine diving depth. Hedgehog forward-throwing anti-submarine mortars, entering service late 1942, fired 24 contact-fused projectiles in a circular pattern ahead of escort vessels, allowing attacks while maintaining sonar contact. The tactical combination proved overwhelming. Submarines attempting coordinated attacks were detected by HFDF during radio coordination, located by radar during approach runs, and engaged by depth charges or Hedgehog before reaching torpedo firing positions. VLR aircraft forced submarines underwater during daylight, preventing them from gaining favorable attack angles. Escort carriers provided persistent air cover, eliminating the Atlantic gap where submarines had operated with impunity. Submarine losses escalated catastrophically. Germany lost 41 submarines in May 1943, 19% of operational strength in a single month. Replacement construction produced 17 boats. Sinking tonnage dropped to 264,852 tons in May, 95,753 tons in June, 123,825 tons in July. The exchange rate reversed. Allied escorts destroyed submarines faster than German shipyards could replace them. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, promoted to Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine in January 1943, withdrew submarines from North Atlantic convoy routes on May 24, 1943. The operational directive acknowledged temporary suspension of Atlantic operations pending development of technical countermeasures to Allied radar and air patrol. Submarine operations continued in less defended areas, South Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and Arctic routes to Soviet Union, but never regained strategic impact against Atlantic convoys. The Battle of the Atlantic represented industrial warfare reduced to mathematical calculation. Victory required sinking merchant tonnage faster than replacement construction. British merchant fleet stood at 21 million tons September 1939. German submarines sank 14.5 million tons between 1939 and 1945. Allied shipyards, primarily American, constructed 42 million tons of replacement shipping. The mathematical resolution, 28 million tons net increase despite losses, represented strategic failure of submarine warfare. The calculation obscured temporal dynamics that nearly produced different outcomes. Between June 1940 and March 1943, submarines sank 11.4 million tons while Allied construction produced 8.9 million tons, a net loss of 2.5 million tons. British import capacity declined from 68 million tons annually to 44 million tons by mid-1942. Food imports dropped to 15.7 million tons in 1942, forcing emergency rationing reductions. Petroleum imports declined to 8.1 million tons, requiring severe restrictions on civilian fuel allocation. The strategic balance approached collapse in winter 1942-1943. Ministry of War transport calculations from February 1943 projected that sustained monthly losses exceeding 600,000 tons would force consideration of negotiated peace by October 1943. Churchill's March 1943 assessment, documented in War Cabinet minutes, estimated Britain could sustain operations through December 1943 at current loss rates, after which import capacity would fall below minimum requirements for military operations and civilian subsistence. The technological and tactical countermeasures deployed in spring 1943 arrived within this narrow window. 6 months' delay in VLR aircraft deployment, escort carrier availability, or centimetric radar production would have extended submarine effectiveness through a period where Allied shipping capacity could not sustain combined losses and operational requirements. The strategic outcome, inevitable in retrospect given American industrial capacity, remained uncertain to participants until May 1943. German submarine losses totaled 783 boats destroyed between 1939 and 1945. Of 40,900 German submarine crewmen who served, 28,744 died in combat operations, a 70% casualty rate that exceeded any other branch of German military service. The operational environment transformed from permissive hunting grounds in 1940-1941 to lethal gauntlet by 1943-1944, where patrol survival probability dropped below 50%. The strategic impact of submarine warfare exceeded sinking tonnage. Britain deployed 3,000 vessels and 260,000 personnel to Atlantic convoy protection and anti-submarine operations, resources unavailable for offensive operations in Mediterranean, Burma, or Northwest Europe. Escort vessel construction consumed shipyard capacity equivalent to 200 destroyers or 50 cruisers that could have supported fleet operations. Aircraft allocated to maritime patrol, 200 planes by 1943, represented strategic bombing or tactical support capability diverted from other theaters. American military production allocated 18% of total escort vessel construction, 12% of aircraft production, and 8% of trained personnel to Atlantic anti-submarine operations through 1943. These resources, if available for Pacific operations, would have accelerated island campaigns by an estimated 6 to 9 months according to post-war U.S. Navy analysis. The strategic diversion validated submarine warfare's operational premise, forcing enemy resource allocation beyond physical losses inflicted. Post-war naval doctrine incorporated lessons learned at cost of 2,828 Allied merchant vessels and 175 warships destroyed. Convoy procedures became permanent feature of naval warfare planning. Integrated air-surface anti-submarine operations, demonstrated effective only in 1943, became standard doctrine. Technological development of submarine detection systems, sonar, radar, magnetic anomaly detection, received sustained investment throughout Cold War as counter to Soviet submarine forces. The submarine's evolution from dismissed peripheral system to strategic threat mirrored historical pattern of military innovation. Institutional resistance to tactical change, documented in British pre-war assessments, German surface fleet emphasis, and American skepticism toward convoy procedures, delayed countermeasures until submarines nearly achieved strategic objective. The tactical vindication of coordinated patrol operations, initially dismissed as impossible due to communication and navigation limitations, demonstrated that operational constraints could be overcome through systematic problem-solving and tactical innovation. The tonnage warfare mathematics established enduring strategic lesson. Industrial capacity ultimately determines outcomes in sustained attrition campaigns. Submarines could temporarily achieve tactical superiority and inflict severe losses, but could not overcome opponent possessing 10-to-1 advantage in shipyard construction capacity. American entry into the war, providing this industrial advantage, guaranteed ultimate Allied victory in Atlantic regardless of tactical developments. The temporal question, whether submarines could force British capitulation before American industrial production reached full capacity, remained uncertain until spring 1943, when technological countermeasures and overwhelming escort numbers decisively shifted strategic balance. The campaign's legacy persists in modern naval doctrine. Anti-submarine warfare remains primary concern for surface fleet operations. Submarine detection systems represent major component of naval research budgets. The strategic principle that maritime supply routes constitute vital vulnerability for island nations or forces dependent on overseas resources shapes military planning for any nation lacking food or fuel self-sufficiency. The Battle of the Atlantic validated submarines as strategic weapons and simultaneously demonstrated their limitations. In the historical ledger, the campaign recorded 2,828 Allied merchant vessels sunk totaling 14.5 million tons, 175 Allied warships destroyed, 783 German submarines lost, and 28,744 German submarine crewmen killed in action across 2,075 days of continuous operations. These numbers represented more than statistical abstracts. They documented the transformation of institutional certainty into operational reality, where dismissed tactical innovation nearly achieved strategic objective before industrial capacity and technological adaptation restored conventional wisdom's predictions. The submarines proved devastatingly effective until countermeasures caught up, and the narrow margin between strategic failure and success remained measured in months rather than years.